Okay, I'm going to call this meeting to order. I'm Ernie Hall, and our conversation concerns the street in West Anchorage that Harriet and I are both representatives from. I'd like to begin by going around the table with introduction, starting with you, Harriet.
Harriet Drummond, West Anchorage Assembly.
Dick Train, Assembly.
WSC Under Assembly.
Ernie Hall, Assembly.
Mark Neal, Police Department.
George McCalish, Municipal Manager.
Sharon Walsh, Deputy Director, Development Services.
Jerry Weaver, Community Development Director.
Carlene Wilson, Addressing Official.
Jack Frost, Development Services.
Okay. Which of you are going to lead the discussion?
Well, let me just open it up, and look, I'm going to try to accomplish two things, and then we're certainly subject to any questions that you have. We thought it might be helpful just go ahead and go through the process so everyone understands the process that we have to go through for name changes. And as we talk about the process, we'll also talk about what we did this time and what's going on with this particular piece. And then the other thing is, I thought it might be helpful from the Chief of Police perspective as to why we're doing name changes and why these name changes are extremely important to us. So if we can accomplish those two things, and hopefully we'll cover your concerns that you have, and then whatever questions you have after that, please ask. Okay? So with that, I'll turn it over to our addressing official.
Okay, so what I'd like to start off with first is behind the map that you had in your packet, there is a couple of documents that basically list out what we do in addressing for problem streets and how we change street names. And if that's okay, I'd just like to walk you through it so you know you have it in front of you, but it might help if I walk you through it a little bit, and then you can ask questions along the way if you'd like to. First, the main important part is that street names must be unique. There are multiple duplicate street names within the entire municipality, which you know goes from Eklutna all the way to Portage. So anything that there is duplicates of could be Eagle River versus Chugiak, it could be Eklutna versus Girdwood, all considered duplicate because they all belong within the municipality. So Anchorage Code states that street names must be unique. The next one down would be Anchorage Municipal Code of Regulations and address changes. One reason for an address change is because of a duplicate street name. So if there's a duplicate street name, that gives us the authority to change an address. To change the address, we then have to take care of the actual duplicate street name itself. And below that, there's duplicate street names. There are just a couple of examples on what we would consider a duplicate street name. And what are parts of a street name? There's three main parts in most of the streets within the municipality. A lot of streets will have a north in front of it, and that's the pre-direction. The primary name is what we consider the duplicate part, which would be, in this case, Hillcrest. And then the street suffix or street type is defined by code, and that's in the Code of Regulations as well. Following that is the Anchorage Municipal Code Approval of Street Name Alterations. This is a portion of code that writes out how we change a street name. And this is very basic. It requires us to give property owners notice of 14 days before submitting an executive order changing the street name to the mayor. At that time, they can appeal the name if the mayor chooses to sign the executive order. Below that, we just talk about 911 dispatchers and that they depend on the caller to identify their location and must find that location in an internal database that addressing keeps for the 911 database. To remove any potential confusion from the very beginning of the emergency, street names and addresses must be unique. This is why we would like to change a lot of these duplicate street names so there is no potential for confusion. After the Godfrey incident in 2003, the municipality of Anchorage made it a priority to clean up our 911 database, and removing duplicate street names was one of the changes that the MOA implemented. In 2008, the municipality of Anchorage compiled a list of problem streets. This list has grown since it was created and currently has a total of 112 problem street names on it. Since the list was created, 11 street names have been completed, and there have been 91 street name changes since the year 2003. Once the streets were added to the list, they were prioritized from 1 to 6. 1 being most important, 6 being least important, is mostly a street sign problem. There's a lot of street signs out there that get stolen a lot. Those are ones that the traffic department has specifically asked us to add to the list to change because of that problem. And the streets were actually prioritized on the list from the police department. And Hillcrest Place, Hillcrest Circle, Hillcrest Drive was added to that list by the Anchorage Police Department. And there are 15 properties fronting the subject street that we're talking about, Hillcrest Place and Hillcrest Circle. 3 separate notices were sent out. And the first notice was actually asking for suggestions, because we've made it our practice to not just implement a new street name to a street. We want the public to have as much input as they can. So our practice has been to send out the first notice asking property owners for suggestions, giving them reasonings why we need to change their street name. Once they suggest new names, we go through them, make sure that they're valid, they're unique according to code. We then send out a second notice asking those property owners to vote on their favorite street name out of that list. In this case, we ended up sending out a third letter, which was a second vote letter extending the voting period because some property owners were out of town during the holidays when the vote period ended. On the second page, it shows the tallies that we had. 15 ballots were mailed. There's 15 property owners that have property fronting a street. There's 3 choices on there: Romick Park Circle, City View Circle, and Inoko Circle. 10 responses were received by my office. 4 votes were for Romick Park Circle, 6 were for City View Circle, and 0 for Inoko Circle. Are there any questions as of yet?
I do have a question. Before in your presentation you said Eagle River, anything within the municipality.
Mm-hmm.
I hate to even mention it, but we have a Hillcrest in Eagle River.
There's 2. There's one on Eagle River Road, and there's one over by Tubiac High School. It is on our list.
So you just aren't going to do all the Hillcrests at once?
No. What we did is during the we were trying to work from the priorities. So the list that we have, as I said, were prioritized from 1 to 6. 1's being the most important. The ones that were prioritized as a 1 were a duplicate within the same community. So the Hillcrest Drives in Eagle River are on the list to be done, but there's no real order within the priority on how they're done.
Do you want me to talk a little bit about the history? A lot of the history stems from, it really got started before Godfrey, but people remember the Godfrey incident, and that's where the addressing problems became most noticeable and most tragic. We learned a lot from that. After the Godfrey matter, you may recall that it involved confusion between the Eagle River Road and Eagle Glacier Loop, which intersected Eagle River Road. It wasn't just a mechanical or data problem, but there were data problems. There's also human error, so I'm not going to blame only the system for what happened that night. But we had identified some problems before then. We were in the process of fixing them, but that matter happened before we got there. But several of the fixes that came out, there were essentially 4 different kinds of addressing fixes that had to be accomplished to make the 911 system work properly. And you may ask, okay, so why do we have to do this? Why does the system have to work the way it does? Ideally, if everybody knew where they were and they were lucid when they called 911, we wouldn't need these systems. But people often aren't lucid when they call. Sometimes they're going unconscious. Sometimes the phone's taken away from them. Sometimes they don't speak English. Sometimes they're from out of state. There's any number of reasons why folks can't tell us where they are. Sometimes we don't know. So we have systems that try and tell us where that person is. One of the problems we had, and that we tried to fix, is the different databases had the addresses in different ways. Post office thought one thing, the municipal databases said another thing, our 911 system knew something different from that. The phone companies had something different from that, and people would say their own version of their address. None of these things matched up. And unfortunately, the telco data all feeds into 911, and that created situations that are problematic. So we had to get a master database and decide that's going to be the official address, okay? And everything else feeds off of that. So that was the first thing. The second thing was to make sure that everybody in the community knew what their address was. And so we had that phone system. You called in and checked your address, and if you thought there was a problem, then you were instructed on how to try and resolve it. So that was another thing that had to be done. The third thing was just slipped my mind. But the fourth thing anyway is was getting duplicate streets sorted out, so there weren't too many possibilities for an address. What the systems do when they take the data is if you type in exactly what you're told, it comes up and says, we think this is correct address, and this is the address you typed in. It doesn't know every single address, it knows ranges of addresses. So it basically says 3923 fits in an address that I know works for birdsong. That's what the computer's saying. So it's probably okay. But if it's wrong, here's a bird song, but it's got a different range of addresses, and then here's a Birdsley or something like that. They'll give you 2 or 3 options. Well, if you have a whole bunch of Hillcrests, if you have 5 or 6 Hillcrests with different ranges, you could even have 2 that have ranges that are appropriate, because if they're both north-south, they might have addresses, ranges that would make sense. So it doesn't always tell you exactly which one to go to. It does rank them in priority. If this one doesn't work, try this one next. If that doesn't work, try that one next. So that's how the system works. Getting back to our issue at hand today, it works better if there are fewer of those things for the system to choke on. Fewer Hillcrests in this case to lay out and say, well, if it's not this one, you get 6 of them that you can go check on. So we're trying to limit the number of lookalikes in the address. So that's why it's important. Cuts down on confusion in the dispatch center, cuts down on delays in time before they can dispatch, cuts down on time when the officers get there and fire right after us, trying to work it in the field. As you can tell here, if all the Hillcrests are in one location, they're scurrying around the neighborhoods if there's confusion. But if the Hillcrests are separated, you can be bouncing back to different parts of town trying to sort all this out. So that's sort of the historical reasons why we're doing what we're doing.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
Oh, Mr. Chair, sorry.
Harriet.
I'm confused.
It's quite all right.
Mr. Vice Chair, Chair of the work session. Thank you, Chief Mew. You couldn't think of the 4th item, but I can think of a 4th item that I found extremely important during my door-to-door work in my campaign that just ended, is that numbers on people's houses
that's the 4th one.
In many cases, non-existent. Thank you.
And that was
you.
the 4th.
Talk about that.
That was the 4th, and there were some nonprofits that actually bought the signs, and they could go along and stick them in the ground if people didn't put them on their numbers on their door or on the front of their house by the porch light where we could see it. You could call this group, and they would come out and they'd pound a spike by the road that has you still see a lot of them in Eagle River. Highland Road, there's a bunch of them. I drive up there every day.
Not in West
Yeah, that was the 4th, was actually labeling the houses.
I've seen numbers that people have hung Christmas wreaths over. I mean, actually, I can't see the number, but the only place they could possibly be was under the wreath, and sure enough, there they are.
Maybe they don't want to be found.
Well, so addressing is really, it's a mess around the
It's a law
country.
to not be found.
And at the time, Cincinnati was the model, and we used a lot of what Cincinnati did to try and go through the ground truthing and all that. It was a ton of work. You may remember all that. The street names has been, we're getting around to that part now. I think the addressing database problems were the most urgent, and those were largely fixed a long time ago. And now we're getting down to street names.
So specifically, if I could just, specifically as to what we're dealing with right now, this before the assembly, of course, is the Hillcrest Circle and the Hillcrest Place. What is still being processed at the staff level is Hillcrest Drive. You haven't seen that one yet. You know, we were talking about this the other day, and in retrospect, it probably would be better off to try to get them all together so everybody could understand what was happening here. But because they're in the process right now of going through and getting input from the public like was outlined, that's where an awful lot of feedback is coming on the Hillcrest Drive portion as we understand it. And again, no decision has been made on Hillcrest Drive itself. So it has not gone to the mayor. I don't even know what the vote tally even looks like regarding that right now, because that still would be in the process. But they do go hand in hand together because they're all in the same close proximity of one another, and they all have the Hillcrest in it. And I think an awful lot of the pushback that you're receiving is primarily the folks that may be on the Hillcrest Drive portion as opposed to the Hillcrest Place and the Hillcrest Circle. I don't know. There may be some as well that are concerned about that, but I do know that an awful lot of the signatures that we've seen actually are around the actual Hillcrest Drive. So anyway, you know, that's kind of the process, and I don't know how long it's going to take to go through the Hillcrest Drive portion. I don't even know if you've got all the input back yet or not, have you?
Yes, that was actually a different system in the change. This Hillcrest Drive portion did not actually get the option to suggest new street names and vote on them, because we view that portion of Hillcrest Drive that loops up around as an extension of Anton Way. Anton itself is a perfectly unique street name within the municipality. There's no other Anton. So our suggestion and proposal to them was to rename their portion of Hillcrest Drive Anton Drive. Once that was approved, we would then change the type of Anton Way to Anton Drive to make it flow consistently with code as a drive because of the direction and the length of it.
Okay.
So at that time, the time period for that has been up. They were sent their letters. They received 3 weeks comment period. And during, I believe it was probably the first 2 days of them receiving their letters is when the petition already started with that one, because they were opposed to the name change itself. But the time period has ended with that, and I have, at this time, gone as far as I can without actually submitting the executive order on that one, which I still believe, from an addressing perspective, should change to Anton Drive. So that would be my suggestion to the mayor, is to approve that. Which again is a separate one, but that's exactly
and
what
it has not gone to the mayor yet at all. It hasn't gone through the process.
We understand this is disruptive to people, and that people, they get used to things and don't like change. My street name changed as a result of this whole project. And I remember what it was like getting a letter from them saying, you know, your life just changed, you know, deal with it. And, you know, we did, survived it.
Yeah, I too went through it in 1962. My street was actually off by 2 blocks, and 82nd became 84th all of a sudden, and it was quite a drama. Any questions from anyone? Harriet?
It's hard for me to talk about this because of my potential conflict here, but I need to point out that at the beginning, the residents on Hillcrest Place and Hillcrest Circle, which is where I live, were told that their names had to change because our streets intersected with Hillcrest Drive. We were not told that, oh yes, and Hillcrest Drive, where it intersects with your street, is also going to change. You know, and I think we all got used to the idea that our street name had to change and understood why, because there were 3 streets named Hillcrest that all intersected. But then all of a sudden, weeks after the Hillcrest Place name change was nearly final, I started to hear from my neighbors on Hillcrest Drive that their street name was to be changed. I think there was a lot of...
Harriet.
Yeah.
Could I make a suggestion, and maybe this will work or maybe not? I know there's people that you know really well in the audience that know a lot about this.
Mm-hmm.
If you would be happy maybe passing your concerns to one of them to verbalize? I know that sounds kind of crazy, but when we got that you're not supposed to participate in this.
Okay.
But they may have your same concerns. And I just would recommend to the chair that they allow one of the neighbors to come and express their concerns. If that would be okay with the chair.
Does the chair come join us?
Who do you, is there anybody in particular you want, Harriet, or do you want them all, or what do you want?
I would ask them whoever's interested.
Can I speak to one thing?
Yes.
Since I'm the old lady on the block,
Mm-hmm.
the only one that made it here. Anyway, 1964, since you brought up 62, I'm bringing up 64. The city changed the name of the street where I live in the same house on the same street, is now Hillcrest Place. It was Circle Drive, and the city of Anchorage changed the street name because there was a Circle Drive on the hill. And so it was right at the time of the earthquake, and my earthquake layer had to explain the reason my address is changing is just a street name change. It has nothing to do with the losing my house on Hillcrest, on Circle Drive. Yeah, so they changed this already once. This is the, but nobody here is, they're all too young to remember.
To remember.
Yeah.
Tim, did you have a comment?
Well, yeah, I do. The process was difficult. There was a number of conflicting comments. You know, when we started, we were told Hillcrest Place had to keep the place designation. Hillcrest Circle had to keep the circle designation, but we could come up with different names. And then at another point, we were told, we had voted, we'd submitted names and so on and so forth. We were told that we didn't have to vote again. They were just extending the time. And so at the end, there were only 4 votes for, I think, for the name that the people on Hillcrest Place wanted. But that was because they didn't count my vote and another vote. And supposedly there was one person, one vote. There were more votes for the circle than there were people in the circle. But there's a distinct difference between the circle and the street above it. We know everybody. We had a meeting. Everybody from Hillcrest Place came. When I went around, I'm the one who collected the petition names. It wasn't difficult to get those signatures. Of the 10 people on Hillcrest Place, I went to 10 houses. I got 8 signatures. The other 2, one was a rental unit, and so with an absentee landlord, so I didn't get the landlord's comments on that. The other person got caught up in the Hillcrest Drive issue as well. They have the distinction of living on the corner of Hillcrest Place, Hillcrest Drive, and Hillcrest Circle. And so, you know, they told me they weren't going to sign any of the petitions because there were 3 petitioners coming around, you know, and they were just confused. They didn't understand the process. And so there were a lot of things that happened. I was an urban regional planner at one point in my life. And in my mind, or at least in the jurisdiction that I worked, the protocol for names in terms of street, circle, place, way, was recommended. It was not mandatory law. And so I don't know if that really is the case or not. But the people on Hillcrest Place, a majority of the people on both Hillcrest Place and Circle don't want to be Hillcrest or City View Circle. We don't have anything with the city, and it's not descriptive of our neighborhood. It's really, until this episode happened, it had been 15 years since I'd been down in the Circle, a block away, half a block away, down in the cul-de-sac, down where the people do have the view of the city. It's a difficult, there were a lot of, I believe, mistakes made. If you own 2 properties on that particular street, you only get 1 vote, even though you're paying taxes on 2 pieces of property. But anyway, there's a lot of issues that came about, a lot of confusion, a lot of misinformation. So the validity of the votes and the name City View Circle. It's just not valid, and so we need to go through the process.
So if I understand what you're telling me, you don't have a problem with the street name, you've got a problem with why the street's being named.
Well, I don't have a problem with, I understand the need for distinct. You know, if you give your address right, they can find it, especially with Google Maps. It's easy for people to find it. I once had a pizza man looking on Hillcrest Drive for Hillcrest Place. So I understand the need. It's what is named, but it's the validity of the process as well. And when you throw Hillcrest Drive into that neighborhood, tight-knit neighborhood, up on the bluff pretty much, and the Anton change and all that, people are just, they don't understand the process. They're throwing up their hands, and they're very frustrated with it, especially when we know there were mistakes made in the process that invalidates it.
I believe it's been said at the table in the last few minutes that people don't want to change, and that's actually not the issue here. Our neighborhood, many people came together and said, we're going to have a change, and so let's talk about what kind of a change we would like to see. So this isn't about people won't accept a change. It is about the process, as Tim said, and I'm really only familiar with the Hillcrest Place issue. Growing up, until I was about 13, my dad was in the military and the Coast Guard, and we lived in so many different places, I couldn't tell you the addresses except for one was Easy Street. So when my kids graduate from West High School, they will have lived at only 2 addresses. And both of those are on Hillcrest Place. And so when we had the conversation as a neighborhood, where we choose to live and we choose to stay, because of the history there and because we've been there 15 years, my family is the newcomer to the city. We had a conversation about the history. And there we went with our kids to talk about what would be a good name, because we're gonna have a change, that would reflect the history of this neighborhood. And so a number of us came up with the Romic Place or some concept including Romic. And then the process sort of unraveled from there. But that's really the concept coming from my family in terms of we live in that neighborhood because of the community, because of the history, because people like Della look out for my kids, we look out for Della. And it matters to us that that kind of community is preserved. So it's about the name, it's about the process.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Yes.
I live over on Hillcrest Drive at 1331, and I wrote and have put in my input to the police department, or whenever it happened that the woman wasn't able to be found for a long time when she was shot. My next door neighbor nearly died. 1341, which is right next to me on the corner there, that's Kay Marshall's house. That address is actually thought to be by the police department over in the condos. They do not come to our side of the street. I go running out into the street trying to get police. I have done it for dogs. I had vicious dogs in my yard when I first moved here, 1997. Every single time I try to call, they will not come to my house. They tell me, no, you do not live where you say you live. If you go and Google my address, 1331 Hillcrest Drive, you will be shown those condos. That's where I live, according to the map. I brought the taxi map. Impossible to get a taxi. One of the problems is, and well, I can kind of bring it up here. What part of this process that's been a difficult one, I'm very much in favor of Anton Way because that's already the name of it. But my problem is that 1331 is here, 1331 block is over here. The police, even when you change it to 1331 Anton Way, they will not come here. They will be looking for it over here. And that's a serious problem. That's why they keep on going here. They say, I live here. They say, no, this is 1331, that's 1331. You live here. and I don't, I live over there. So, and then these are all 2100s, and they're gonna keep me a 1300, and I'm parallel. And part of the process is that I kept on telling them this, and they're not listening to me. Yes, you need to change the name. You also have to look at the numbering. Or we're gonna be doing this again in 5-10 years, and we're gonna be, then I'm gonna be mad.
So you're particularly challenged, you don't only have a
I
name
am the
challenge, you're
emergency
numerically
watch,
challenged.
I am the emergency watch leader
I think what's
for
happening,
this community.
I think what's happening here is the curve on the drive is switching us from east-west numbering to north-south numbering. And the numbers, the 2000 block and the 1300 block are close enough that not very far away, you're in the 2000 block.
But here, this is even parallel to me. It goes
I know,
22
that's
and
what
then
I'm
it
saying.
jumps to 13.
I know, what I'm saying is these 22, those would be north-south.
They keep on, the police tell
Right.
me I
North-south.
live down by Park Strip.
These are north-south numbers.
I live down by New Sagaya.
These turn to east-west numbers.
I know,
Problem
but
is,
you guys can't find me.
you're not
I
listening.
don't even care. Enough said.
So there's a bit of a challenge.
Name's Ira Perman. I don't quite have a dog in this fight. I live about 2 blocks away from the affected area, but I just have a kind of a question, and that is the alternate or the name that's being selected or proposed here for what was Hillcrest Circle, I believe is City View Circle?
Correct, for the whole street. What used to be Hillcrest Place and Hillcrest
Okay.
Circle.
My question is,
Yes.
does that not create confusion as it is? There's a whole neighborhood in this town called City View,
Yes.
which is on a completely different part of town.
Exactly.
And I would just suggest that that's probably not a great name for that reason. I know it's not a street name, but it
Correct,
is
that's,
clearly a neighborhood name. It's a
Sure.
well-established neighborhood name.
I understand. Code says City View Circle is a unique street name.
Well, maybe code needs to be looking at other possible confusions. Well,
And because no others, and this is something that I received input from APD, is that they like the idea of the name City View because there is no other street name that starts with the word city. So in their view and opinions, it's a very unique name. So they back that.
But my understanding, I don't know if I'm right on this or not, but I don't think we recommended the name. That got recommended by someone in the neighborhood, is that correct? Okay. So I think our point of view is, I don't think officially we care what the name is. If the residents pick one that's unique, then we're happy.
Correct. The folks that live on the cul-de-sac got together, came up with the name City View themselves. The folks that live on Place are the ones that suggested Romig Park as their name. There was also one other name suggested by someone else named Innoko, but that received no votes. So it ended up being between City View and Romig Park. But again, yes, they were suggested by the property owners.
I think it's really hard for people to deal with this because of all the notifications you have to do. Would it be problematic to kind of wait and do all this at once so you don't have to do it twice? I mean, that seems logical to me, but I don't know. I'd like your response.
All at once meaning?
Well, Hillcrest Drive needs to be done too.
Sure. Oh, you mean the street names, the separate streets together? Is that what you're asking about?
Well,
Why it was two separate? They're two. So we look at them as two separate street names, and so we would not process them together. We could have processed them side by side, simultaneously. But the reasoning we did it this way is because, again, Hillcrest Circle, Hillcrest Place was considered a priority 1. This portion of Hillcrest Drive was only considered a priority 2. So again, we were trying to tackle the priority 1 problem streets first before we moved on to the second.
But in retrospect, I think we agree, being able
Sure.
to see both halves of the
Yes.
equation at one time probably would.
It
It's
seems
a bit
sort of,
better.
okay. And then my other thought was somebody is gonna get to keep Hillcrest, I guess, somewhere.
Somebody does.
One name will get them.
Correct. The portion that exists at the intersection of Anton and that moves west across Bernard, that has been deemed the Hillcrest. That would remain the same.
All right, so by
that would move across in front of that high school along there.
So basically, even though you're not dealing with my two Hillcrest and Eagle River, you
At
are.
this time, correct.
Because you're already precluding their possibility of keeping the name. So that's an argument for doing them all at once too, isn't it? Or not? Seems to me.
Harriet, she's talking about all, you're saying all the Hillcrest in the entire municipality as opposed to all the Hillcrest at this location?
I'm just trying to figure out a better way to deal with this, and it seems to me there's confusion. We heard from multiple people who said the process is kind of confusing and duplicative. And I don't know, maybe it's just dealing with all the Hillcrests here, or it's dealing with all the Hillcrests in the city. But if you do it more comprehensively, it's in a way less painful.
Harriet.
You mentioned the section of Hillcrest Drive east of Spinard Road. That one block section between Spinard and Anton.
Correct.
Is going to remain the same.
Correct.
Or do you think it's going to remain the same?
Yes.
That one property, that pie-shaped property immediately to the north of it, which on the taxi map is numbered 1341 Hillcrest Drive, will that address remain 1341 Hillcrest Drive, or does that change along with the curved part of Hillcrest Drive?
It would change along with the curved part. So it would become the new name, again, proposed by our office as Anton.
She has about the number.
This
The
is the
number.
problem with
Oh, the
being too
number.
familiar. That house's front door faces that section of Hillcrest Drive that you say will remain the same. And they have a U-shaped driveway that goes from Hillcrest Drive, it crosses the corner.
I think that's a separate issue.
Could I ask a question?
Maybe needs
I'll
to.
get to you in just a moment.
You're okay, so
She's talking about-
I don't think that any of the numbers change in this exercise.
Well, I don't do that as a number.
So
But
if
if
they
we-
should, then that's something we'll.
Yeah, if we've got a numbering change, we need to address that too, but that was not part of this.
Okay, because there is no address on that one block section of Hillcrest Drive now. It's only the house on the corner.
So what we're gonna have to do is take a look at the numbers. You know, that's a different issue as opposed to
Right.
the names of the
Right.
streets. So we're gonna have to take a look at that now that we know that we
Okay.
have a problem where the police department's not showing up at the right place.
Well, the other person probably has the same problem. I
Yeah,
bet
but
you it
the other
happens
house does too.
half the time.
Yeah.
Okay, we're gonna have
The other
Mr.
direction.
Trainee, then we got Mr. Steele and this young lady. Thank-
Mr. Chair, just a general statement on numbers of streets with, numerous streets with the same name. I was invited to an event on Turnagain Parkway last fall. And when I went looking for the address on Turnagain Parkway, on Google Maps before I went there, I realized there's no way that house could be on Turnagain Parkway because it was numbered in such a way that it was on Turnagain Boulevard. And at that point, I realized, oh my God, there's a Turnagain Parkway, there's a Turnagain Street, there's a Turnagain Boulevard, all of which are way larger than these three streets that we've been talking about here. Deal with hundreds of addresses, dozens at least, and do not intersect, that seem to me almost to be higher priority. Of course, I'm not privy to the same lists that you are in terms of who gets the most calls. But Turnagain Parkway, the three Turnagain streets in Turnagain are someday going to have to be changed, and there's going to be a whole lot more change happening and a whole
My
lot
guess
more
is they're on the list
upset people.
someplace. But I'll
Mr.
check.
Trainee.
Just during this reminds me of a discussion I was having with my grandsons a couple days ago. Connor was playing in the yard and got a scrape on his stomach, so his mother put a Band-Aid over it. He came to show his grandmother. His grandmother said, "Do you want it ripped off all at once, or should we do it little bits at a time?" I think rather than taking off all at once, we're doing it little bits at a time. It's a little more painful. I agree with Debbie. We need to take all these streets, whether it's in Eagle River, which in spite of my best effort is still part of this town. But nonetheless, I'm sorry, Debbie, I couldn't resist. Ernie, we need to deal with all these streets that have the same name at one time. So you go through this pain one time, not keep bringing it up.
It's particularly painful for Assembly people.
2 points. The first one is I'm particularly upset because I was told my vote was going to count from the previous submittal, and it didn't. So, and the support for this is that only 4 people on Hillcrest Place voted for that. Well, I got 8 signatures on my petition, all but 2 on that. There were 5 votes for City View Circle, and there's only 6 votes, and there's only 5 pieces of property down there. So, I don't understand the issue. Unanimously, the people up on the hill on Hillcrest Place do not want to be City View Circle, and so that's my argument. We have a homeowners association in essence, in that we are a community. We have a community water district, or an improvement district. I think that a good way is to open this process up, this whole naming of the neighborhood, if you will. Like I said, one person wouldn't sign a petition because they were frustrated. They didn't know. There were 3 petitions going around. They mistakenly thought that they got the choice of being either Hillcrest Drive or Hillcrest Place, where in fact, their numbering system was probably going to dictate what it would be, either Anton or City View. So I think that the Romley Park Improvement Company, which is our water district, ought to call a meeting and look at the organization and try to come up with a comprehensive plan for the neighborhood. That's what I think should happen. This has not been handled well, and there's some real problems with it. So I think we need to start over. And I suspect you're going to hear from Hillcrest Drive people that also want to do that.
You have a
Yes,
question?
Ernie, Your Honor, I just am confused because I think this conversation about Hillcrest Drive, which doesn't really concern me on Hillcrest Place, it seems to be stopping at Spenard Road. And like the way I tell people how to get to my house usually, I say, will you come along Hillcrest Drive? They're familiar with going to West High School on Hillcrest Drive. It's the crest of the hill. The street goes along the crest of the hill. And it continues across Spenard Road, which is a very difficult concept to get into people's heads. And I've missed a taxi to Juneau on the judge's staff to go down there because they couldn't find me. So it's east of Spenard Road. The Hillcrest Drive continues along, and all I'm wondering is, are they talking about the continuation of Hillcrest Drive all the way across Spenard Road? Well, they just want to stub it Anton Way on that east side? That's, I think, confusing.
It goes across. Yeah. I suspect what you might want to consider doing is when this comes before you, why don't you send it back to us? And I'll tell you why. I think there's enough confusion right now, right or wrong, or however it occurred, regarding the balloting of Hillcrest Circle and Hillcrest Place, that we probably ought to at least try one more time to try to get a consensus of what the name of the residents, what they would like to see. The other thing too is we really need not separate from this action, obviously separate from this action, but we need to take a look at the numbering on that street, that particular portion of the street on Hillcrest Drive, and figure out, is there a better way of doing it, and how can we deconflict? Because the ultimate goal is to make sure that if someone calls for help, they're able to identify exactly where that call is coming from and get to that right place. And that's all we care about. What they're named, is immaterial as long as they're a unique name and we don't have duplicate names. So, whatever, the folks that live along that street would like to have as far as the majority for a name, I think we're fine with that. So I would recommend that perhaps when it comes before you, you send it back, and then, we'll try it one more time.
Okay. Mr. Attorney?
I'd like to send it back, but I would like it be done citywide, so we don't end up biting this elephant again.
It's my guess that's going to become a recommendation, and that was going to be my question to you. Is this insurmountable for us to deal with all of these at one time? Because this is something we're constantly getting the calls from constituents about the street here.
You mean all the Hillcrests, or do you mean
No,
every street?
I mean, a way to deal with these street names.
We've been working at this since 2003. This is big.
It's huge.
I think, Mr. Hall, I think a partial solution, and I'll have to check with staff to see what the order of magnitude is as far as the workload to do it, and the confusion that might be generated from it. But if we've got more than one Hillcrest, say we got 5, it appears that we've got at least 5 right now, then maybe we try to deal with those 5 at a time. But again, I don't know what that actually means and how easy that would be unless I talk to folks about that. And so we couldn't make any type of commitment like that right now until we sit down and see what that means. To try to deal with all the street name changes at one time, I don't think we could physically do it. And I think we'd have people so confused and upset that we'd never get through it.
I'm not saying all the street names, because there's so many street names, I'm just saying Hillcrest.
Yes.
Just the 5 we're dealing with.
I think what we'll find is there's going to be conflict between the Hillcrests in Anchorage, and there will be some conflict between the Hillcrests in Eagle River. But whoever wins in Eagle River and whoever wins in Anchorage, there could still be a Hillcrest in either of those 2 places, and they won't conflict with each other. Because Eagle River, Chugiak, Anchorage, those are part of the address that we're going to see in the 911 center. So I don't think that becomes a problem. Am I correct on that?
It's technically still considered a duplicate, but that's where we take recommendation from APD and AFT.
So maybe I'm wrong about that. Maybe you're...
No, I think you're right. No, what you just said is, if you recommend that they keep a Hillcrest in the Eagle River area and a Hillcrest in the Bowl area, then maybe that's okay if you guys recommend it.
We know that because it's coming in from a different telco, it's coming in on MEA. I mean, I don't know if that's a big deal.
But if I understood you correctly, you've got 112 name changes to deal with yet?
That's the total list. A lot of those have, not a lot, I shouldn't say that. Since we compiled the list, I believe, I think I wrote 11 have been completed, so there's about 101 left to be completed. That includes the Hillcrest that we're working on currently.
So we're going to be at this for a while.
And she's a staff of 1 right now, too.
Diligently working at it, but.
Any other questions?
Thank you.
Not, thank you. We're done.